Sometimes I look back at the little moments that changed me, and they never come from grand gestures. They come from something quiet, like a beam of light falling through a window, or someone simply standing behind you when you least expect it. Before I tell you what happened that morning in my kitchen, let me ask, where are you watching from tonight? Chicago? Dallas? Maybe somewhere smaller, tucked between the hills and the river? I love hearing where everyone's joining from, so tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about life surprising you when you think you've seen it all, make sure you tap that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps more than you know. And honestly, it makes me feel a little less like I'm talking to myself in this old house. That morning began the way most of mine do now. Too early, too quiet. The kitchen clock ticked like it was keeping time for someone else's life. I had just finished rinsing my mug when the first sunbeam cut across the tiles, catching the steam rising from the coffee. I've always loved that soft light. It hides the wrinkles, softens everything. It makes you feel like time forgives you a little. I was halfway lost in that thought when I heard the door creak. I turned and there he was, even my daughter's boyfriend, standing in that pale strip of light, like he'd stepped out of some memory I hadn't lived yet. He looked startled, like he hadn't expected me to be up. "Morning, Mrs. Hall," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. I smiled because that's what you do when someone calls you by a name that reminds you you're older. "Morning, Ivan. You're up early." He scratched the back of his neck, sheepish. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd grab some water." For a second, neither of us moved. The sunlight reached just enough to touch the edge of his sleeve, and I noticed the faint tremor of dust motes swirling between us. Funny how your mind slows down in small moments like that. You start noticing everything you normally rush past. "Coffee?" I asked, lifting the pot. He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Thanks." I poured him a cup, watching the thin trail of steam curl toward the light. He took it with both hands, careful not to touch mine, though there wasn't any reason he couldn't. That tiny unnecessary caution caught me off guard, like he was treating me as someone fragile. Maybe I was. We stood there, the two of us, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I could hear birds waking outside, the world slowly stitching itself together again. He leaned against the counter, his shoulders still heavy from whatever 20-something worry he carried. I remembered being that age, how everything felt urgent and undefined. I said, surprising myself, this house used to be full of noise. I still catch myself waiting for it. He nodded slowly, not looking away. "I get that. My mom says the same thing now that I'm out most nights." Something softened between us then, not attraction, not anything that dramatic, just recognition. The kind that happens when two people realize they're standing on opposite sides of the same feeling. I turned back to the sink, pretending to rinse the mug again, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. "You're good for her," I said. "She doesn't say it, but I can tell." He laughed under his breath. "I'm trying. She's amazing." There was a pause. I glanced up, and for just a moment, I caught his reflection in the window, the way the morning light framed him, how calm he looked. It made me think of how strange life is. You spend years chasing noise, and then the quiet moments end up teaching you who you really are. I broke the silence before it grew heavy. "Well, don't let me keep you. The coffee's better when it's hot." He smiled, genuine this time. "Thanks, Mrs. Hall." He took one step toward the door, then stopped. "You ever miss it? All the running around? The full house?" "All the time," I said. "But mornings like this remind me that empty isn't always bad. It's just different." He nodded, thoughtful, and slipped out, the door clicking softly behind him. When I turned back, the kitchen looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel the same. Something had shifted, like the light had found a new corner to rest in. I stood there for a while, hands wrapped around my mug, feeling a warmth that wasn't just from the coffee. It wasn't about him, really. It was about being seen, even for a moment when you thought you'd faded into the background of your own life. Maybe that's why I wanted to tell this story. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something quietly important did. And maybe you felt that too. That little flicker of being noticed, reminded that there's still more to you than what people assume. If you have, you know exactly what I mean. So, where are you watching from tonight? Let me know down below. I'll be here again tomorrow, same time, same kitchen, with another story about the small ways life surprises us, if you're willing to listen. I didn't see Evan again for a few days after that morning in the kitchen. The house settled back into its usual rhythm. My daughter rushing in and out between work and errands, the sound of the television humming just for company, and the kettle always half full on the stove. But the light in the kitchen changed somehow. It wasn't about him exactly. It was about what that morning stirred up in me. The realization that I'd been living like a guest in my home life. The following Saturday, the house filled again, at least for a while. My daughter Clare had invited a few friends for dinner. Evan was one of them, of course. I'd spent most of the day preparing, roasting chicken, slicing vegetables, setting the table with the good plates I hardly ever use. Cooking always made me feel useful, needed, and that feeling had become rarer than I liked to admit. By the time everyone arrived, the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the rooms. The laughter, the chatter. It reminded me of when Claire was a teenager, when the house had been full of voices and footsteps and plans. I stayed mostly in the kitchen, refilling glasses and pretending to fuss over the food. I liked watching from the edges. It made it easier to see people for who they really are. Evan came in at one point, carrying the empty salad bowl. "Can I help with anything?" he asked. I shook my head. "You've done plenty just by eating. That's what a good guest does." He laughed softly. "I'm not sure I count as a guest anymore." There was something true about that. He had begun to fit into our lives in quiet, unforced ways. The way he helped fix the porch light last month, or the way he always said goodnight before leaving, never assuming he could just slip out. Simple, decent things that reminded me what respect looked like. We cleaned up together while the others drifted into the living room. It was an easy silence between us, the kind that doesn't need filling. Every so often, our hands reached for the same dish or towel, and we both pulled back with a quiet laugh. Not from discomfort, just an awareness of space, of presence. "You always keep this place spotless," he said as he dried the last plate. "Old habits," I replied. "When you live alone long enough, you learn to clean instead of think." He leaned against the counter. "You seem like you think plenty." That made me laugh. Too much, maybe. Thinking doesn't fix a leaky roof or a creaky knee. "No," he said thoughtfully, "but it fixes other things." There was something about the way he said it that made me pause. Not because it was deep, but because it was sincere. Young people don't always speak that way anymore. They rush their words like they're racing their own thoughts. Evan didn't. He slowed down, considered things. I wanted to say something back, something meaningful, but Claire walked in then, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You hiding in here?" she teased. He smiled, that same easy grin. "Just helping your mom." She looked at me, then at him, and rolled her eyes. "She's probably making you work. Come on, we're doing a trivia game." I smiled, waving them off. "Go ahead, I'll join in a minute." When they left, the kitchen fell quiet again. I leaned against the counter, letting the hum of their laughter spill down the hallway. It wasn't sadness I felt, it was something quieter, harder to name. A kind of ache that comes from realizing how fast time rearranges things. One day you're the center of your home, the one everyone depends on. The next, you're watching from the doorway, grateful just to be included. I took a deep breath and looked around, the empty plates, the soft glow from the pendant light above the sink, the faint scent of lemon soap. The kitchen was always where my life happened, in pieces and leftovers. It was where I raised a child, argued, laughed, and learned how to start over. And now it was where I was beginning to see myself again, not as someone's mother or someone's wife, but as me, just me. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the quiet returned, I found a note on the counter. It was folded once, neat handwriting across the top. "Thanks for dinner, Mrs. Hall." The rosemary chicken was perfect. Underneath that, smaller letters, "You should write these recipes down. People would love them." It was simple, thoughtful, and it made me smile. I tucked it into the drawer beside the oven, where I keep things that matter. Old photos, ticket stubs, recipe cards. That note joined them like it belonged there. Before heading to bed, I poured myself a small glass of wine and stood by the window. The street was empty, a soft mist rolling in under the streetlights. Somewhere out there, my daughter and Even were driving home, laughing about something small and ordinary. I felt a strange peace then, knowing that life had a way of giving you exactly the moments you needed, even if they didn't look the way you expected. And maybe that's what the kitchen light had really shown me that morning, that I wasn't done feeling or noticing or growing. Maybe the best part of being alive at 58 isn't what you've already lived through. It's realizing there's still something inside you that stirs when someone sees you, really sees you, even if just for a moment. The next morning, when I came downstairs, the sunlight hit the same spot on the counter. The mug was in the same place. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't just make coffee out of habit. I made it because I wanted to sit, to watch the light move, to be part of the morning again. And that's when I decided maybe it was time to tell more of these stories, to remember them out loud. So if you're still watching, tell me where you're from this time. Do you get mornings like this where you live? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. There's more to come, and I think you'll want to hear what happened next. The week after that dinner, the house felt quieter than usual again. I suppose that's what happens after you've had company. Laughter lingers like perfume in the air, and when it fades, you notice its absence even more. I tried to keep busy, though the days have a way of stretching thin when you live alone. I gardened. I organized old photos. I even painted the small fence by the driveway that hadn't seen a brush in years. But through it all, I kept thinking about something I hadn't thought of in a long time. What it meant to feel seen, not just for what I do, but for who I am. It wasn't really about Avon. It was about what that moment in the kitchen stirred awake. A reminder that there's more to me than routine. That there's still light in me, even if I'd forgotten how to turn toward it. One afternoon, while I was trimming the roses, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Clare. "Hey, Mom, would you mind if Even stopped by to pick up his jacket? He left it last weekend." I texted back, "Of course. I'll be here." When he showed up later that day, it was early evening. The air had that golden hue that only autumn brings, soft, forgiving. He stepped onto the porch, jacket slung over his arm, a shy smile on his face. "Didn't expect to forget this," he said. "You'd be surprised how many people do," I replied, holding open the door. "Come in for a bit. I just made tea." He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, thanks." Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and cinnamon. I'd been baking earlier, though mostly to keep myself company. I poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs and gestured toward the table. "Don't mind the mess. I've been reorganizing." He smiled. "This place always feels like home, you know that." Something about that made me pause. It wasn't what he said. It was how simply he said it. No flattery, no hesitation, just truth, spoken kindly. We sat and talked for a while. About work, about how fast the seasons seemed to change, about nothing and everything. It felt easy, not the kind of easy that makes you forget yourself, but the kind that makes you remember who you are when you're not trying too hard. At one point, he looked around the kitchen, his eyes settling on the old wooden clock above the doorway. "You've had that forever, haven't you?" I nodded. "Since before Clare was born. It's the only thing in this house that hasn't broken or changed color." "It's nice," he said. "You don't see things like that anymore." I laughed. "No, now everything's disposable. Fast, shiny, replaceable." He looked at me then, and there was a thoughtfulness in his eyes that caught me off guard. Not everything's meant to be replaced. I didn't know what to say to that. So instead, I took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth travel through me. For a moment, I let myself sit with the silence, with the sound of the clock ticking, with the feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Eventually, he stood. "I should go," he said, glancing at the time. "Claire's expecting me." "Of course," I replied, trying not to sound reluctant. "Tell her I said hello." He nodded and started toward the door, then stopped. "You should come out with us sometime. Dinner, maybe? You like the restaurant we go to." I smiled. "Maybe I will." When the door closed behind him, I stayed where I was, the house suddenly too still again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like something had been planted in that quiet, a seed of curiosity, maybe even courage. That evening, I went through the old box under the stairs, the one full of things I'd tucked away for later. Inside were bits of who I'd been. An old camera, a half-finished journal, a postcard I'd written but never sent. I ran my fingers over the words on the back. "Wish you were here." I couldn't even remember who I meant it for. Maybe myself. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a walk downtown. Just me, no destination. The sun was gentle, and the breeze carried that faint smell of roasted coffee from the cafe near the corner. People passed by in pairs or groups, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible among them. I stopped in front of the bookstore I used to take Clare to when she was little. The bell above the door still jingled the same way when I pushed it open. The same woman, older now, like me, was behind the counter. She recognized me instantly. "Margaret Hall," she said, grinning. "I haven't seen you in forever." I laughed, a little embarrassed. "Life got in the way, I guess." "Well, life has a habit of doing that," she said. "But it's nice to see you back." I wandered the aisles for nearly an hour, picked up a cookbook, a poetry collection, and a notebook, blank pages waiting to be filled. As I paid, she asked, "Starting something new?" "Maybe," I said, "starting over at least." That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I opened the notebook and wrote just one line: "I'm still here." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. When I turned off the light, the moonlight stretched across the counter, the same spot where the morning sun used to fall, the same place where everything had begun. And as I stood there, listening to the steady hum of the house, I realized that the real story wasn't about Even at all. It was about the woman I was becoming again, someone awake, curious, and alive to the quiet beauty of her own life. So if you're watching this, tell me, when was the last time you surprised yourself? When was the last time you looked in the mirror and saw not what's gone, but what's still waiting? Leave me a comment. I'd love to know. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. There's more to this story than you think. The days turned cooler after that, the air crisp with the promise of winter. The maple outside my kitchen window shed its last golden leaves, one by one, and I watched them fall like old pages from a story that had already been told. Funny thing was, I didn't feel sad about it. I felt ready, like I was finally turning my own page. Life didn't change in a dramatic way. It never does at my age. Change comes quietly, disguised as small choices that add up. I started taking my morning walks without needing a reason. I began cooking not just to fill the house with scent, but to experiment again, trying recipes from the cookbook I'd bought at the shop, the one that smelled faintly of ink and cinnamon. I'd read a few lines of poetry with my coffee, words that reminded me how much beauty hides in the simplest things. And sometimes, when the house was still, I'd talk out loud, testing stories I wanted to tell on camera. It started as a way to fill the silence, but it became something else, a way to listen to my own thoughts. I realized how many of my memories had gone untold, how many moments had lived quietly inside me, waiting to be spoken. One Saturday afternoon, Claire dropped by unexpectedly. She had that look, busy, tired, but trying to pretend she wasn't. "Hey, Mom," she said, setting her bag down. "You've been hard to reach lately." "I've been busy," I said with a small smile, "finding new hobbies." "Oh, really?" she laughed. "Like what?" I gestured to the notebook on the table. "Writing, recording, remembering." She raised an eyebrow, curious. "Recording what?" "Stories," I said, "about life. About small things that end up being big when you look back. I thought maybe other people might want to hear them too." She sat down across from me, surprise softening her face. "That actually sounds nice, Mom." There was a pause. She looked around the kitchen, the same one she grew up in, the same one that had seen our best and hardest moments. "You've changed a little," she said quietly. I smiled. Maybe I finally caught up with myself. We laughed, and it felt easy, like it used to when she was younger, before life started pulling us in different directions. She stayed for coffee, told me about work, about how Even had been helping her plan a trip. I listened, genuinely happy for her. For both of them. When she left, she hugged me tighter than usual. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." After she drove away, I stood on the porch for a long while, watching the sky shift from pale orange to blue. The wind carried the scent of distant fires, someone burning leaves down the road. I thought about how time burns too, clearing what's no longer needed, leaving space for something new to grow. That evening, I set up my little camera on the counter, facing the kitchen window. The same window where the sunlight had caught me that first morning. I took a deep breath and hit record. "Hi," I began, smiling into the lens. "It's Margaret again. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I love knowing who's out there, who's sitting with me in this moment. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. We're just getting started." I paused, glancing toward the cup of tea beside me, steam rising into the light. "I want to talk about something today," I said softly. "About how we all carry versions of ourselves that we forget. The young one who dreamed big, the tired one who carried too much, the quiet one who waited to be noticed. And sometimes life gives us small moments, tiny, unexpected encounters that remind us those versions never left. They just needed a little light to wake up again." I smiled then, not for the camera, but for myself. "I think that's what happened to me," I continued. "I was standing right here, in this kitchen, when I realized that life doesn't end when things change. It begins again in a different way. You just have to be brave enough to stand in the light and let yourself be seen." The recording light blinked softly, the room wrapped in that same amber glow that had started it all. I let the silence breathe for a moment before ending the video. Later that night, after uploading it, I read the comments as they started coming in. People from Ohio, California, Texas, even someone from Maine, all sharing their own stories, their own quiet awakenings. One wrote, "I thought I was the only one who felt like that." I sat back in my chair and smiled. That one line was enough. Because that's the thing about life at 58. You start to understand that meaning isn't in the big, loud moments. It's in the quiet connections, the words you share, the warmth you pass on when you think no one's listening. I looked out the window once more, at the kitchen light reflecting faintly on the glass. The house was still, the world outside soft and blue. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in it.